The evening started like any other in the restaurant. The lights were warm, the tables were polished, and the soft chatter of customers filled the room. The waitstaff moved from table to table with practiced steps, carrying plates and glasses while trying to hide the exhaustion that came from long hours on their feet. Among them was a quiet young waitress who kept her head down and did her job without drawing attention. She wasn't the type to talk much, but people who worked with her always said she had a calm and gentle presence. Outside, the night was cold, and most customers came in hoping for a peaceful meal with good music playing in the background. Normally, the restaurant had a pianist who played every evening. His music added life to the room, and guests often said that the place felt incomplete without that soft piano sound. But that night, everything changed. Just as the tables began filling up, the manager received a call. His face tightened as he listened, and when he hung up, he rubbed his forehead in frustration. The pianist had fallen sick and wouldn't be able to perform. There was no backup, no one else who could play. The manager looked around the dining room, knowing that a large group of important guests had booked a section for a late dinner. They always expected live music, and he feared their disappointment. He walked through the restaurant trying to think of options, but there were none. The piano sat in the corner of the room, looking almost lonely without someone behind it. The staff whispered among themselves, wondering what the manager would do. Some of the older waiters simply shook their heads. One of them said under his breath that tonight might end with complaints. The young waitress heard all of this while setting glasses on a table. She kept glancing toward the piano, her expression thoughtful. For years, she had avoided going near it. Even though she was surrounded by music every night, she tried not to let herself imagine what it would feel like to sit there again. The piano had once been a big part of her life, something she loved deeply. But life had changed, responsibilities had come fast, and dreams had been pushed aside. She worked here now because she needed stability, not because she had stopped loving music. Still, as the whispers continued, she felt something inside her shift. The manager stood near the counter, worrying aloud that the evening would fall apart. He kept checking the door as if hoping a replacement musician would magically appear. The young waitress watched him struggle, feeling a mix of concern and hesitation. She didn't want to cause trouble. She didn't want to embarrass herself. She didn't want people to judge her before she even started. But the thought of the silent piano bothered her even more. She took a slow breath and walked toward the manager. At first, her voice was so soft he didn't hear her. When she repeated herself, he turned and blinked in surprise. She asked him if she could try playing. He looked at her as if she had said something unbelievable. A waitress? Playing for a full restaurant? He didn't know whether to laugh or to take her seriously. He asked her gently if she really knew how to play. She nodded, though she didn't explain anything about her past. She didn't say how many years she had practiced, or how many nights she had spent quietly playing on an old piano at home when no one was listening. She didn't say how much she missed it. She simply said she could try. The manager hesitated. He didn't want to risk making the evening worse, but at the same time, he had no other options. After thinking for a moment, he told her to go ahead but warned her that the guests were expecting something nice. She simply nodded again, her expression steady as she walked toward the piano. The staff paused in their steps. One waiter nearly dropped a tray. Another whispered, "What is she doing?" A few guests turned their heads, confused about why a waitress was approaching the instrument. Someone laughed quietly under their breath, assuming she was going to dust it or fix a cloth, but she kept walking slow. Steady and focused, she reached the piano and lightly touched the edge of it, as if greeting an old friend she hadn't seen in years. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear of playing, but from the weight of memories. She sat down on the bench, adjusting her posture carefully. The room didn't go silent immediately, but the noise softened as more people noticed what was happening. The big group of guests had arrived by then. They were settling into their seats when they noticed the waitress at the piano. They exchanged confused looks. One of them raised an eyebrow, as if wondering why the restaurant would allow such a thing. A couple of people whispered, clearly doubtful. The young waitress ignored all of it. Her heart thumped gently against her ribs as she placed her hands on the keys. She could feel the cool surface beneath her fingertips, a sensation she had missed more than she realized. For a moment, she kept her eyes closed, letting the sounds of the room fade in the background. She reminded herself that she didn't need to impress anyone. All she needed to do was play the way she always had, honestly. Softly and from the heart, the manager stood near the side nervously, unsure of what was about to happen. The staff watched from behind counters and half-open doors, and the customers leaned back in their chairs, some curious, some doubtful, others amused. No one knew what she carried inside her. No one expected anything special from someone who spent her days serving dishes and cleaning tables. To them, she was just another worker, someone ordinary, someone whose life was probably simple and predictable, but in that moment, she felt something she hadn't felt for a long time. A quiet strength. A sense of belonging. A reminder that even though life had forced her to step away from her dreams, the music inside her had never truly disappeared. She opened her eyes, took one last steady breath, and prepared to play the first note. The room, still half distracted a moment ago, now waited without fully realizing they were waiting. It was the calm before something none of them expected, and as her fingers pressed down on the keys, everything began to change. The first note from the piano was soft, almost unsure, like someone whispering after being silent for too long. It floated through the room gently, cutting through the scattered conversations. A few guests stopped mid-sentence, their eyes drifting toward the corner where the young waitress sat. The sound was delicate but meaningful, like it carried a story that only she understood. She didn't rush. She let each note fall into the next one with care, as if her hands were remembering old paths they used to travel. The noise in the restaurant continued at first, but it slowly faded as more people realized that this wasn't just random playing. There was something deeper in the way she touched the keys, something emotional, something honest. A man at one of the tables leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. He didn't expect much when he saw a waitress sit at the piano, but now he was quiet, listening. A woman across the room gently nudged her partner and pointed toward the young woman playing. Even the large group of guests, the ones who were expected to be the most demanding, stopped pouring drinks and paused to watch. The manager stood stiffly near the counter, watching with a mix of fear and surprise. He had agreed to let her play only because he was desperate, not because he believed she could carry the whole evening. But now, hearing the calm strength in her music, he found himself staring at her hands. They moved with a kind of confidence he had never seen in her during her normal work. There were no rushed steps, no hurried motions. Instead, her fingers glided with purpose, but even with the growing attention, the waitress didn't look up. She stayed focused, lost in her own world. She had been away from the piano for years, and now that she was touching the keys again, it felt like reconnecting with a part of herself she had buried long ago. Her heart beat fast, not from fear of the crowd, but from the emotion that came with the music. Some people still whispered quietly. A man at a nearby table murmured that he doubted she could keep up the performance. Another wondered if she had just memorized one easy piece. But their doubts softened as the melody grew richer. It wasn't just a simple song. It had layers, gentle notes rising into stronger ones, soft pauses that made the next sound even more beautiful. On the other side of the room, one of the older waiters stood with his arms crossed. He had known the young waitress for a while, and he had never imagined she had such a talent hidden inside her. He whispered to another staff member that maybe they had all underestimated her. The other waiter nodded slowly. Unable to take his eyes off the piano, the young waitress shifted her fingers, moving into a part of the piece that carried more emotion. It was the kind of music that made people feel something even if they didn't understand it. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply letting herself express what she had held inside for so long. Her hands moved faster now, the melody growing stronger, filling the entire room with warmth. At a table near the window, a child who had been restless all evening suddenly went quiet, his eyes fixed on the piano. His mother looked at him in surprise, grateful for the unexpected moment of peace. She smiled softly as she listened. realizing that the music carried something gentle enough to calm even a child. The big group of guests, the ones the manager had been so worried about, leaned back in their chairs. A few of them had their mouths slightly open, stunned that the restaurant's waitress was the one producing such beautiful sound. One of them whispered that he hadn't heard playing like this in a long time. The room felt different now. The chatter that usually filled the restaurant had turned into silence, except for the soft clink of a fork or glass here and there. Even those who tried to pretend they weren't curious eventually turned their heads. Unable to resist listening, the young waitress's heart felt lighter with every passing second. She could feel the music running through her fingers, her arms, her chest. It wasn't just a performance. It was a release. Years of hiding her passion, years of letting her dreams fade. Years of convincing herself that she wasn't meant for anything more than routine work. Now all of it came out through each note she played. But even as she poured her feelings into the music, doubt crept into her mind. She wondered if she was doing enough, if she would make a mistake, if people would judge her the moment she missed a note. She took a breath to push those thoughts away, reminding herself that she was here for herself as much as for anyone else. The restaurant lights reflected softly on the polished surface of the piano. She could see the faint shimmer as her hands moved. She remembered sitting at a very old piano in her childhood home, practicing late into the night because it was the only time the house was quiet. She remembered the encouragement of someone she once loved, someone who told her she played with great emotion. She remembered the moment life forced her to leave all of that behind. And now here she was back in front of the keys, not to chase a dream, but simply because she couldn't stand watching the piano sit silent. Her music softened again, turning gentle, like a soft breeze moving through a quiet street. People leaned closer to listen. A couple sitting near the back held hands, feeling swept up in the peaceful mood the music created. The room had changed so much that someone entering at that moment might have thought they stepped into a small concert instead of a restaurant, but not everyone was convinced yet. A man sitting close to the entrance whispered to his friend that he still didn't believe a waitress could keep the same level of skill throughout the evening. He wondered if she would stop soon. But right after he said that, she entered a more complex part of the piece, her fingers dancing across the keys with confidence. Proving him wrong without even knowing it, the young waitress still didn't make eye contact with anyone. If she looked up and saw all those eyes staring at her, she knew her nerves might take over. So she kept her gaze low, focusing only on the keys and the music flowing from them. In the background, the kitchen staff peeked through the swinging door, trying to listen without getting caught. One of the cooks whispered that her playing reminded him of the music he heard at a concert years ago. Another shrugged but kept listening, unable to deny the beauty of the sound. The manager, who had been nervous from the moment she sat down, slowly relaxed. He could feel the room settling into the music. People weren't complaining. They weren't restless. They weren't disappointed. Instead, they were quietly enjoying something unexpected. He watched her play and realized that he had never seen her this confident. At work, she was shy and reserved, someone who tried her best not to bother anyone. But here, at the piano, she looked like someone else, someone who belonged on that bench. As the piece neared the end, the young waitress prepared for the final notes. They were soft and sweet, like a slow farewell. Her heartbeat steadied. Her breathing softened. And when the last note settled into silence, she kept her hands on the keys for a moment longer, letting the moment breathe. The room stayed perfectly quiet. No forks moved. No glasses clinked. It was as if everyone was waiting to make sure the music had truly ended, and in that quiet, the waitress finally lifted her hands, her fingers slightly trembling, not from fear this time, but from emotion. She didn't know yet what the reaction would be. She only knew that she had given everything she had in that moment, without holding anything back, and the room, still frozen in silence, was about to show her just how deeply her music had touched them. For a few long seconds, the restaurant remained frozen in silence. The young waitress kept her eyes down, unsure of what to expect. Her hands rested gently on her lap, still warm from touching the keys. She had played from her heart, but she didn't know if the room had understood it. She didn't know if the guests had liked it or if they were quietly judging her. The silence felt heavy, almost too heavy for her to breathe. Then it happened. A single clap broke through the quiet. It came from a table near the center of the room. Then another clap followed from the far corner. And then, almost as if everyone had been waiting for someone else to start, the entire restaurant erupted in applause. It wasn't polite or forced. It was real, strong, and full of surprise. Some people stood up, clapping with genuine excitement. Others simply nodded while applauding, as if trying to show respect for something they didn't expect to witness that night. The young waitress lifted her eyes slowly, astonished by the reaction. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. She had never imagined that people would react like this. She thought they might ignore her or even feel confused. But instead, the room was filled with appreciation she never thought she deserved. The manager, who had been standing nearby in complete shock, finally snapped out of his daze. He looked around, his mouth slightly open, amazed by how the guests responded. It wasn't just the important group. It was everyone. People who had come for a simple dinner were now cheering as if they were at a concert. He hadn't seen anything like this in the restaurant before. The big group of guests, the ones he feared the most, were among the loudest clapping. A few of them even whistled in excitement. One of them raised his glass toward the piano, nodding in approval. Another leaned forward and whispered something to the person beside him, and both stared at the waitress with new respect. It was a moment the manager never saw coming, but for the young woman at the piano, all of this felt unreal. She didn't know how to react. Should she smile? Should she stand? Should she thank them? Her throat tightened with emotion, making it hard to speak. All she could do was bow her head slightly. A small gesture that came naturally from humility. Even after the applause began to fade, people continued discussing what they had just heard. Soft conversations floated through the room. I didn't expect that. Where did she learn to play? She should be performing somewhere, not serving tables. These whispers reached the waitress's ears. They didn't sound like criticism. They sounded like admiration, and that made her chest warm with a feeling she hadn't felt in a long time. Confidence. But before she had time to take in the moment, someone from the big group called out, asking if she could play another piece. The restaurant fell silent again, this time waiting for her answer. She looked up, surprised. Another piece? She hadn't expected to play at all tonight. The first performance came from impulse, from emotion. But now, hearing people ask for more, she felt something inside her stretch. Awake something she thought she had lost forever. The manager stepped forward cautiously, as if trying not to interrupt the moment. He whispered to her that she didn't have to play again if she didn't want to. She had already done more than anyone expected. But the look in her eyes told him something else. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't uncomfortable. She was moved. She was touched. And she wanted to continue. She nodded gently and placed her hands on the keys again. The room quieted immediately, like someone had turned down the volume of the world. She took a breath and began a new melody, one she had not played in years. This song was softer, slower, and even more emotional than the first. It carried a quiet sadness mixed with warm memories. The notes drifted like a gentle breeze, brushing past every listener with a feeling they couldn't quite explain. The waitress didn't just play the melody, she lived it. Each key she pressed felt like a step into a part of her past she rarely allowed herself to revisit. Some guests leaned forward, elbows on the table, their eyes fixed on her. Others leaned back and closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. A middle-aged woman near the back wiped her eyes quietly, touched by something she couldn't describe. Even the waiters stopped moving completely. For the first time in years working in that restaurant, they genuinely forgot that they had tasks to do. The manager stood near the counter again, but this time he wasn't nervous. He watched the waitress play with a sense of pride and amazement. All this time, he had seen her as a quiet employee who did her work politely without causing any trouble. Now he realized how little he knew about her. He wondered how someone with such talent had ended up serving tables instead of performing on stages in the kitchen. The cooks stopped working for a moment. One of them leaned against the wall, shaking his head slowly in disbelief. "That girl is something else," he muttered. Another cook nodded, saying he had goosebumps from the music. Even though the kitchen noise usually drowned everything out, tonight the soft notes reached them like a whisper. The young waitress continued playing, completely unaware of how her music had moved the entire place. She wasn't thinking about impressing anyone. She wasn't thinking about her job or the reaction of the guests. She was thinking about the piano, the memories tied to it, and how good it felt to let her soul speak without words. She finished the second piece with a soft, lingering note that hung in the air like a gentle echo. The silence afterward was even deeper than before, as if the room needed a moment to breathe again. Then the applause came once more, louder and more emotional. People clapped so enthusiastically that a few tables even shook. Someone from the big group shouted, "Bravo!" A couple near the entrance stood up and clapped with complete joy. One elderly guest pressed his hand over his heart. Overcome with emotion, the waitress felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes, not because she was sad, but because she had never imagined that strangers would respond to her music like this. Her whole life, she had pushed her dreams aside, thinking they didn't matter anymore. But now, sitting at the piano bench with applause surrounding her like a warm blanket, she realized something important. Her gift was still alive. The manager walked toward her, a proud smile on his face. He leaned down and whispered that she had saved the night. She shook her head gently, embarrassed by the praise. She didn't feel like she had done something great. She felt like she had simply opened a door she had kept locked inside herself for far too long. But the guests weren't done. One of them asked if she performed anywhere else. Another asked how long she had been playing. Someone from the big group asked if the restaurant could book her regularly. These questions made her shy again. She wasn't used to attention. She wasn't used to people expecting something from her. She stood up from the bench slowly, bowing her head again. She didn't give long answers. She simply said that she played a long time ago and that she didn't expect anyone to enjoy it this much. Her voice trembled slightly, but it wasn't from fear. It was from disbelief and gratitude. People kept thanking her as she walked back to her place, though she didn't fully understand why. She had only played 2 songs. But to the listeners, it was more than music, it was emotion. It was sincerity. It was rare that she returned to her tasks. Some guests smiled softly at her, greeting her with new respect. Others whispered to their companions about how natural and beautiful her performance was. Even the staff looked at her differently, not as someone who stayed in the background, but as someone who had changed the entire mood of the evening. And though she tried to return to her routine, the feeling inside her didn't fade. Something had awakened. Something she hadn't felt in years. A connection to the part of herself she thought she had lost forever. What she didn't know was that this night would not only change the way people saw her, it would change the course of her life in a way she never imagined. The rest of the evening moved forward, but the mood in the restaurant was no longer the same. The young waitress walked back to her regular duties, but the world around her had completely changed. People who earlier didn't even notice her walking by now greeted her with warm smiles. Some nodded at her with quiet respect, while others whispered kind words as she passed. She wasn't used to this attention, and every compliment made her cheeks warm with embarrassment. But there was something else too, something she hadn't felt in a long time. A gentle pride. A sense of being seen, really seen, not as someone who carried plates and served food, but as someone with a meaningful talent. It was a strange feeling, but it filled her heart in a way she couldn't describe. The restaurant, which normally buzzed with noise, now had an unusual softness to it. The guests continued their meals, but many kept looking toward the piano. It felt almost sacred now, like the instrument carried the warmth of her music long after she stepped away from it. A few people from the big group even got up from their seats and walked over to examine the piano up close. As if trying to feel the magic lingering on the keys, the manager stood by the counter, still bewildered by the night's events. He kept wiping the same spot on the countertop, not because it needed cleaning, but because he was too deep in thought. He kept replaying the performance in his mind. He couldn't believe that the quiet waitress he saw every day, the one who never bragged about anything, who stayed humble no matter how hard the day was, had this kind of gift hidden inside her. When she returned to the counter to pick up an order, he pulled her aside gently. He told her that she had saved the evening, not just for him but for everyone in the restaurant. His voice was warm, shaky even. He asked her why she had never told anyone that she could play like that. She lowered her eyes and said softly that she didn't want to inconvenience anyone. She explained that music was once her whole world, but life changed too quickly and she had responsibilities she couldn't ignore. She had let the dream fade to the background. Thinking there was no place for it anymore, the manager listened quietly, his eyes softening. He told her that talent like hers should never be hidden. He said the restaurant needed someone like her, not just as a waitress, but as part of the atmosphere that made people want to come back. She shook her head shyly, unsure of how to respond. She didn't want to seem ungrateful. She just never expected anyone to care this much. As she continued working through the evening, she noticed that people were treating her differently, not out of pity or surprise, but out of genuine admiration. One elderly lady called her over just to hold her hands and tell her that her music reminded her of her late husband. Another person said that her playing had softened a hard day and made them feel peaceful for the first time in weeks. She listened to each person quietly, her heart swelling with emotions she wasn't prepared for. When the restaurant finally began to slow down, she returned to cleaning tables. The piano sat quietly in the corner, reflecting the dim lights above it. She walked past it several times, each time feeling a pull in her chest, like the instrument was calling her again. She didn't dare sit down one more time, afraid that someone might think she was showing off. But inside, she wanted to play again, not for the crowd, but for herself. As the night reached its end and the last guests began to leave, the big group approached her. The one who seemed like their leader stepped forward and thanked her personally. He told her that her music had reminded him of his childhood when his mother used to play similar melodies. He said her talent wasn't just skill, it was emotion, the kind that touched the heart rather than just the ears. She smiled shyly, unsure of how to handle such deep praise. Then he asked her a question she never expected. He asked if she would consider performing at an event he was hosting the next month. She froze for a moment, staring at him in disbelief. Her hands almost trembled. A performance? At a real event? She didn't know if she had the confidence for that. She had just gotten used to playing again after so many years. The idea felt too big, too overwhelming. She opened her mouth to answer but stopped. She didn't want to refuse out of fear. She didn't want to hide again. So she said she needed time to think. The man nodded respectfully and handed her his card, telling her that the offer would remain open. She slipped the card into her apron pocket. Feeling the weight of a decision she never imagined she would have to make. By the time the last table was cleared and the chairs were put back in place, she felt exhausted but strangely happy. It had been a long night, but it didn't feel like work. It felt like something important had shifted inside her. Something she had locked away had finally been released. Once the restaurant closed and the staff prepared to leave, the manager approached her again. He wasn't carrying papers or talking about schedules like he usually did. Instead, he spoke softly. He said he wanted her to think about playing at the restaurant every weekend, maybe not every night, but enough to add something special to the place. He told her she didn't have to answer now. He just wanted her to know that the door was open. She nodded slowly, overwhelmed. She had spent so long believing that her talent was behind her, forgotten like an old dream. She had never imagined it could still have a place in her life. After changing out of her uniform, she walked out into the cool night air. The street was quiet, lit only by a few lamps. She stood on the sidewalk, taking a deep breath, letting the cool breeze settle her thoughts. Her hands still tingled from playing. Her heart still felt warm from the applause. She walked home slowly, thinking about everything that happened. She thought about the first moment she touched the keys tonight. She thought about the silence that followed her final note. She thought about the unexpected applause, the compliments, the surprise on people's faces, the way the music had touched them. And she thought about how alive she had felt in that moment, more alive than she had felt in years. When she reached home, she went straight to the small corner of her room where her old keyboard sat under a cloth. She hadn't touched it in months. She pulled off the cover slowly, brushing away a thin layer of dust. The keys looked worn, the frame slightly scratched, but it didn't matter. She sat down and placed her fingers on the keys. A soft sigh escaped her lips. She played a quiet tune, one that no one else could hear. It wasn't perfect. Some notes were shaky, but the music flowed from her naturally, like it had been waiting for a chance to return. As she played, tears formed in her eyes, not from sadness, but from relief. She realized that no matter how much time had passed, music had never truly left her. It had simply waited patiently until she was ready to return to it. She finished the small tune and sat in silence, hugging herself gently. Tonight had shown her something she had forgotten, that her dreams were not gone. They were only sleeping before going to bed. She looked at the card in her hand, the one given to her by the man from the big group. She placed it on her table. She didn't know what her answer would be yet, but for the first time in a long while, she felt hopeful. One night, one unexpected decision, one quiet walk to a piano had changed everything. And as she closed her eyes to sleep, she knew deep inside that this was only the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where she didn't hide her gift. A chapter where she allowed herself to be more than what life had pushed her into. A chapter where music wasn't just a memory, but a living part of her again. She didn't know where the path would lead, but she knew she was finally ready to walk it.